welcome you all. It's really nice, heartwarming to have such a large group. A few introductions. Let's see, let's go around the room. The important people around the room. Oh, there's none around that. Patricia Harine, the master gardener, grant writer, treasurer. Patty Baldwin, volunteer, member of the Board of Trustees, chairman of the committee for the August 21st event, which is, what do I do with Grandma's stuff? We're going to have a big tent out here. We've got some experts coming for people to ask questions. But what do I do with this paper? How do I take care of this? Those sorts of things. It's going to be fun. It's on a Sunday afternoon, 2 to 4. Beautiful setting. And if it rains, we've got a tent. And as we go around the room, I'm going to miss some folks. Because my wife, she's important. And Dr. Axelman, who did our bateau out here. Make sure you can see that. And, oh yes, we have a new person here at the History House. A new intern. Her name is Mariah Bunno. And Kim is around here somewhere, probably directing traffic out back. She's our museum assistant, and she does a great job as well. Anyway, let's get started. The first thing that we were going to do is unveil the new illustrative panels. And they're outside. Some of you have had a chance to go look at them. But we've decided to do that last. So forget that. So we'll start with the grand opening of the new exhibit called the Depot. Now, for years, the History House had exhibits here that really didn't change a whole lot. And a light came on back when Lee was dragging us along here, helping us out as curator. We came up with the idea, well, we need to change some things if people are going to come and visit the History House more than once or twice. So we established a room, which is out here, took the birthing room and cleaned it all out and made it so that it's an exhibit room that can change topic to topic, and every 2 years it's a new exhibit. Last 2 years it has had to do with the river drive and the Kennebec River. This year and next year it is called the Depot and transportation to and from Skowhegan. Now, 2 years ago we had an intern, not an intern, but a museum assistant and a curator who took over after Lee retired. His name was Benjamin Doty. Benjamin had graduated from the University of London after graduating with a master's from London, after graduating from the University of Maine with a degree in literature. And while he was in London, he became enthralled with research and looking at actual real documents, not copies or not something that had been written about, but the actual original documents. So, just so happens that we had placed an ad in the newspaper. We had thought we'd have no chances of finding anybody to do the kind of work that we did and so forth. And our hopes were pretty low. And then Ben came to our door, and we were very, very fortunate to have him for 2 years. And at the end of his term, it was time to think about designing a new exhibit for the exhibit room. And he said, I'd like to do that. I said, well, Ben, you leave in 2 weeks. That's all right, I'll get it done. So, in those 2 weeks, he took photos and copies of photos, images, and he did a lot of research. I would see his head stuck in a book all over the place, taking all kinds of notes. And he said, I'll have it ready for you in time for next year. So off he went back to London, Leicester, as it's called, University, to get another degree in the museum science. And sure enough, January rolled around, and I got this thing in my email, Google Documents. So I tried to open it. I couldn't do it, so I had to find a young person to come in and help me open that document and unzip it. Who ever heard of unzipping something on a computer? But anyway, once it was unzipped, all of his work flowed out. Every image was perfect, all sized. The backing was all sized. The labels were all done and sized in the backing. There was even a map as to what picture you put on which of the 4 walls. It was amazing. Couldn't believe it. All I had to do was go to Walmart and have the pictures made and get some glue and some backing and put it together. Not that easy, but it certainly was easier than doing all the work he did. So I salute Ben, who's over in Lancaster, UK, and I salute the work that he certainly did for us. The depot is about what the train did for this community and how it affected and forced it to do different things. The train was extremely influential in what happened to us in Skowhegan. If the train hadn't come to Skowhegan, we would look very different. It's hard to believe that, but it's true. And it brought so many different people to our area. It carried, in May of 1885, there were 5 train loads a day that left here for Boston. Packed full. That meant there were 5 train loads coming up from Boston. It was only 9 hours to Boston. Unbelievable. Where it had been days beforehand. Of course, we can go in what? Well, depends on who's driving. At Dickie's at the wheel, it's more like 45 minutes, but for most of us, it's 4 or 5 hours. Anyway, but it made a huge difference. We were having all kinds of produce. It was not uncommon to have lemons and limes in Skowhegan, Maine in 1885. Prior to that, there weren't any citrus products at all. The other day, I came across this book. And I'd seen it before, but I hadn't read it. It's Memoirs, an autobiography by Susan Russakoff. How many have seen this before? You have?
Got a few copies.
You have a few copies? I took it home, and I've read it. It is a wonderful piece of work. This gentleman came from Russia, learned the craft work of being a watchmaker, jeweler, from here to there to here. Got over here, landed in New York City, and didn't have a penny in his pocket. Not a penny. His grandson is here tonight to talk about him coming to Skowhegan. It's an amazing story. I challenge you to read it. It really is illuminating. Andy Russakoff, tell us about your grandfather and how he came here to Skowhegan. I'm going to pass this over to you. If you want to give a speech along the way, go ahead. I'll get it off the pulpit. You'll have to hold it right up to you.
Okay. Thank you. Mel came down to the store a couple of weeks ago and said, "What can you tell me about your grandfather coming on the train to Skowhegan?" And I said, "Well, as far as I know, he got on a train and came to Skowhegan."
That's what he said.
Pretty much word for word. That's what I said. I really didn't, I mean, I knew he came on the train, and I knew approximately when, but I really hadn't gone back through the book in a while. And the book doesn't tell that much about the actual trip, but it talks about how he decided to come to Skowhegan. And the real Reader's Digest condensed version is that in 1903, it was not a safe place to be a Jew in Russia. And he was living in a town called Starodub, which is about an hour from Kiev in Ukraine. And so you could not just leave Russia if you wanted to. You had to sneak out because Jews were being killed randomly. So it was not a whole lot different than being a slave in the South, almost like the Underground Railroad. He would stay in farmhouses, in the barns during the day, and at night he'd travel from farm to farm till he could actually get out of Russia. He did have some money, which allowed him to travel till he got to England, and from England he paid his own passage to get to Fall River, Massachusetts. And from Fall River he went to New York. And he had learned how to fix clocks to some degree when he was in Russia as a kid. This is a guy who at this point is 18 years old and doesn't speak English and doesn't know anybody in the United States. And so you can kind of guess how horrible it had to be for the living conditions to be in Russia at that point to decide America's got to be the place to go. So basically that's what he did. And he apprenticed for a watchmaker in New York, and they were getting watches shipped down to them from a couple of places in Maine, one of them being Skowhegan. And his logic was, well, they must need watchmakers in Maine, so that pretty much gave him the start. And so in the book, I kind of just picked out a little section of it. He was wondering, you know, he had my Uncle Joe, that was his, the first son. There were 7 in the family. My dad was the next to the youngest. Most of them were born here in Skowhegan, right on Mount Pleasant Avenue, 105 Mount Pleasant. But anyhow, he said, I must do something for my wife and child, but have only $350. What can I do with so little? How can I set up a business with so small a sum? I want to establish my family in a decent home. Do I have to remain a worker at the bench depending on my week's pay? I had a lot of questions, but no answers. So I wrote to Edelman, who was a jeweler here in Skowhegan, asking what kind of place he was in and whether there were any jewelers. What I had in mind was that I'd be better off working for myself. His reply was that if I was interested, he would advise my coming to investigate. This thought wedged itself into my mind. If I don't venture now when I'm young and have a little money put aside, when will I be able to take such a step? So I determined that after Christmas 1906, I would tell my boss that I wanted a week's vacation to go to Maine to see about getting started on my own. If I didn't like the place, I could keep my present job. If I did, I'd come back and stay until he found someone to take my place. He tried in every way to make me change my mind about Maine. It was a backward state, not progressive, had few Jews, and so on. And well, that's not a whole lot different now. I was the only Jewish kid out of 1,200 in Skowhegan High School, except for the year my brother was there. My wife was agreeable to my ideas, as she always was. To her, Maine or Colorado was the same thing. So I was on my way. I took the boat to Fall River, went to Boston by train, transferred to North Station, took the train for Waterville, and changed for Skowhegan. When I arrived, the air was beautifully clear and frosty. The snow was as white as snow could ever be, and as one walked on it, it responded with a crispy, clear singing. Its song was one of welcome to me. Edelman was at the station, not because he expected me, but because meeting trains was his hobby. As though many people came to see him. He took me to his apartment on Mechanic Street, an attic lighted by kerosene lamps. Believe it or not, one still used those smelly matches that take a minute or so to ignite. But the meager meal that Sarisha, that was his wife, served tasted good. I was sick of the east side, sick of running for the L, the elevated train, the ferry, and crosstown cars, weary of the pushing and jumping and of the music of the alley cats. Here there was a serenity and peace. Next morning the sun shone. It was clear and frosty, but I hardly felt the cold as I walked down the street. There were 2 nice large jewelry stores and a 3rd smaller place on Madison Avenue. I figured that there must be people around who could support such fine places. Possibly the owners didn't care to take in work unless they got a good price for it. Maybe there would be a surplus enough for me. I was willing to do all kinds of work so as just to get away from New York and have my wife and baby in a good small place with plenty of fresh air. So long as I was here already, I decided to look around for a flat to rent in case we did settle. I kept walking, and the only place available was down on Water Street, close to the bridge to the island. This is now part of Stern's department store. Well, this was written in 1949, so it kind of tells you there were actually a couple of small buildings between where Stern's Lacases is now and the river, and that's what he was talking about. At that time, it was a wooden building that had formerly housed a blacksmith shop. Mr. Fisher, who had shoed many horses there, had retired to Athens. Mr. Richard Brown, the present owner, had put in a partition and 2 doors, thus making 2 stores, neither of which were occupied. As I poked around, Mr. Brown appeared. "What are you looking for, my son?" We started to talk. Yes, there was an upstairs that could be used as living quarters. Yes, he had some furniture, also a stove for the store, and a cook stove for upstairs. It would cost $25 a month for all of it. Situated almost on the main street with this rental, where else could I pitch camp with so little? Could I get a safe? It seemed that Everett Goodrich had one for sale for $20. A showcase and a counter he could provide. Then why delay? I made my decision then and there, put down a deposit, engaged an old gentleman to build a bench and a few shelves. Now I could return to my wife and expected child and tell them that we were in business.
Very good.
And just for the heck of it, I did print off a couple of old pictures. And so that's kind of how we ended. Now we're still in the same place. It's been 109 years this coming year, and we're the oldest family-owned and operated jewelers in the state of Maine at this point.
Is that right?
Apparently, we don't know enough to do anything else.
Well, that's amazing. It's an amazing story. This young man who got off the boat in New York City without a penny, the travel over was amazing as well, which you didn't get into. You need to read the book to find out. But he got here to Skowhegan, established his business, and had 5 children. Every one of them, 7. I just counted.
1 bathroom.
And 1 bathroom. And I believe all of them graduated from a prestigious college. Is that true?
Close.
Close. Most all of them graduated from prestigious. It's an amazing story, and I welcome you to come to the History House and have a look. Thank you very much for that. What's important to me in that story is that it shows the immigrants that came here, because we have trains coming here. I don't think they would have come here as quickly without the trains. So I invite you to look at the exhibit. It's called The Depot. Oh, I'm sorry.
May I speak?
Sure.
Okay. My husband was one of 9 kids. He was the youngest of 9 kids, and with all the boys, didn't have a family. They lived on the streets. But Mr. Westcott was one of the best friends he ever had. And he took good care of them. And at the time that we got engaged, he bought my ring there. And we paid for it, $5 a week for a walk and But it was a wonderful, wonderful place, and he was a wonderful man, and they all thought so much of him. And he didn't have it because he was just great.
Wonderful. What a nice testimony.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is everybody getting to know each other quite well? That's good. That's good. That's good. I knew Lee Granville way before I met him. His reputation preceded him way out ahead, I can tell you. I needed to volunteer somewhere to do something after my retirement. Thought I had it all worked right out. But I got all my work done and I ran out of things to do. So I was looking for something to do. And someone said, well, why don't you go see Lee Granville over to the history house? So I did. And he hooked me. He hooked me big. I volunteered. He talked me into joining the board of trustees. I was soon made president because nobody else wanted to do it. And he just hooked me. He had just a keen sense of humor, a smile that would go ear to ear. And boy, could he remember things. All he had to do was read something once and it was with him. So I began working here, volunteering, and then becoming director and so forth. And I'd say, Lee, what's this all about? Well, he'd go on for a half an hour about all this and that, about whatever it is I was asking for. And I'd stop and I'd say, Granville, how do you know all that stuff? Well, I read it. I like history. And so, okay. Then after a while, I began hearing this word that he'd say. Perhaps. Perhaps. And that kind of stuck with me. I listened a little closer and he said, well, perhaps this happened, or perhaps that happened. And I figured him out. He didn't know everything about everything. He was just kind of putting some ideas together and saying, perhaps this did happen. It was pretty close every time. So I started using the word perhaps. It's a good word to have. Lee was president here for a long time, on the board a long time, and curator. And during his curator time, he got this place on track for cataloging. And he taught himself the cataloging system, the one we use today. And it's the same system that's used in many of the metropolitan museums in this country. So it's complicated, and it's broad, it has a lot of opportunities. But he taught himself, and he taught me, and he taught others. And he also got us involved with computers and technology. And above all, he left us with a set of expectations and practices, best practices, for taking care of the thousands of items in this museum. His work was good, it was noble, and I miss it. Dawn Cleaver wrote a wonderful poem when he retired, and she came and read it, and she's volunteered to come tonight and read it again. So Dawn, got it all practiced up?
Right, I used to watch him walk around the house, and I tried to describe how he was walking. And he wasn't strolling, and he certainly wasn't exercising. And I finally came up with the word, it was a walk of ownership. It was like he owned this place, it was his. He was a wonderful man.
I don't know if this can get over to you now.
I move.
You move?
It takes some doing, but I can cut.
Could you help her place this up there?
Here, I'll trade places.
You got it.
Listen, just don't watch.
Don't watch?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm always looking at you. Don't watch, don't look.
I don't think she took it with her.
Relative
Yeah,
to
there it is.
Lee, I'd like a copy.
I don't think she's memorized.
have this one. Yeah.
I wrote this poem one day as I watched him walk around the house. I don't know if you know where.
Can you hold it right up close to your mouth?
Yeah, is that better?
Yes.
I entitled it Guiding Star of the History House. Each of us gives of ourselves in our own special way, some through what we do and some through what we say. Lee was a giver, both doing and saying. He does what he gives so well. It's beyond our understanding. What makes Lee Granville so special? We think it's because he cares for each little nook in the history house. And he really just loves being here. He just loved being here. And he spent a lot of time, more than he needed to, because it was a second home. He's more of a history house presence. Seems like there's nothing he doesn't know. He knew everything about this place. He tells it as if he belongs there. Takes us with him to days long ago. When he's there with beloved treasures and collections of unknown wealth, with the past of Civil War soldiers, he's the student, the teacher himself. History is described as a lantern which shines only behind the stern. But Lee's been a lantern for many, shining ahead of the bow to learn. Gratitude left unexpressed is like keeping a gift you've wrapped. So here's our thank you, Lee, with 1,000 ribbons and bows attached. We have an enlarged picture of him somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, right here.
That wonderful smile.
There's the
Oh,
smile.
that's it. That's Lee.
That grin.
We're going to have a fight over who gets to keep it.
We'll pass it around.
Yes, I will.
Last fall, the Board of Trustees of the History House voted to unanimously to dedicate the new exhibit room to Lee Granville. So it is officially, as of tonight, the Lee Granville Gallery. As you go in to look at the exhibit and out to get refreshments later, look over the door to see his name. Now we have Mr. Hastings. Is he out there somewhere?
Yes, he is.
There's another legend in our history here.
The legend is rather interesting to explain. Lee would be 80 actually this month on the 16th. I'm 5 years his senior, but I had the very good fortune of going to work for Lee's mother and father-in-law, and that's where I met Lee in the 1960s. I first noticed him with his head in the furnace at Bucknam's greenhouse, which they had just purchased, and I thought, who's that man and what is he doing? Pulling apart the guts of the heating system for the greenhouse. Well, this guy turns out to have been, quote, Lee Granville. So I met him that way with his backside to me. And we've gotten to know each other very well over a long period of time. He has an interesting middle name, Zantford. Z-A-N-T-F-O-R-D. I do have no idea. I meant to ask his wife, Marcia, where it came from. He was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1936, but I have no idea. Karen, can you tell me where it came from?
It was a family name.
Family name?
Yeah.
What does it stand for? Trouble?
Yes.
Well, there's a secret. I called Marcia, and I said, Marcia, I've been asked to mention some of the things about Lee because I guess I go back further than anybody else alive today who knew him. with History House. I've been on the board there since the 1960s. And Marcia said to me, "Oh, Jim, there's one word that comes to my mind, and that is reading, education." Lee would be given problems, whether it was repairing a furnace, or more interestingly, a huge task of meeting the requirements of the Woolworth Company, who had hired him to provide in the spring flowers at Easter for all of their stores here in the Northeast. And he would have to keep them growing. Well, how do you grow hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Easter lilies and cart them all over the state of Maine? He figured it out. But how do you grow them? And what he did is he said, I just studied before I attempted anything in life. And that's a secret, because he was very successful. He, as my wife likes to say, had a great sense of humor. And that's important. We forget we have to laugh, because Lee would have fun here tonight if he were with us. It would not be said.
Thank you very much. Jim has been on our Board of Trustees, I think it's 49 years. He won't agree with that. But
well, I knew Shirley Whittemore when she was the brains of the Depositors Trust even before that, and look how like young she looks.
So he brings a lot of history to us and keeps us going and keeps us straight. Other folks in the audience that would like to share something about Lee as we dedicate this new gallery to his name? Anybody want to share? This is not a funeral. You don't have to. Okay, Kay. This is Kay Marsh. She's our volunteer coordinator, member of the Board of Trustees, and she can peel paper off the wall like nothing, I can tell you. Can you speak nice and loud so everybody can hear?
Oh, sure. I'll use my cheerleading voice. I'm a Johnny-come-lately to this area, though I was born and brought up in Maine. But I did have relatives that lived on the back road in the 1800s, so that's my connection with History House. But when I moved back to Maine after being away for 30 years, I got involved with looking at my ancestral roots. I had in my collection that I inherited from my mother some photographs. And I'm sure you all got photographs that you have mysteries about. Well, I had one that was a little tiny tintype, 1 inch by 1 inch. And it had been labeled. I had a great aunt who was wonderful about labeling things. And she labeled it great-great-grandmother Parker. Well, somewhere in my travels, I thought there was something wrong with this, because my mother's history of this great-great-grandmother was she died in 1822. Photographs didn't come into being until 1840. Somehow I learned that there was a family Bible that had this information that said she died in 1822. So off to the History House I go, because that's where they said the Bible was. Well, it was at a time when I was working. I'm a retired nurse, and I've worked all kinds of different hours, but I could never get here when the History House was open. At that time, because Lee was pretty much running it by himself and limited hours. Well, one night he snuck me in because there was a board meeting, and the board meeting was somewhere else, and he pulled off this Bible that was way up here on this tall shelf and let me go at it. Well, after perusing it, I solved the mystery. And my thanks to Lee for letting me into the History House.
Very good. Very good.
Oh, I am writing up a little story about that. Maybe it'll be in the newsletter someday. And it's called Resurrecting Rachel.
Anybody else like to share something? Okay. Patricia, are you out there? We were supposed to have this outside, as I stated earlier. And I did put my word in with the Lord to have a nice afternoon. But he's busy. Didn't hear me, I guess. But we do need the rain, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give it up to that. And so I think if we go out talking about the illustrative panels here, and then if we go out as a group and have a good look at them, they are wonderful. When I first started here with Lee, and we were talking about what it is that we could do to make History House come alive even more, one of our dreams was to have some informational panels out here by the river. This was a long time ago, 5, 6 years ago. And our dream was to have these panels out there to tell the story of the history right in this area, because it's filled with history. So, after a while, Patricia Harine heard the story, heard the idea, and she said, well, maybe I can write a grant. She was writing a lot of grants and has done many, and they've been very successful. I said, okay. And we did a little research about what it would cost, and we found that every panel would be a couple $1,000, and we wanted 3 of them. Where were we going to get $6 grand? Plus, then we had to buy the hardware. How were we ever going to do that? Well, she did her magic. She combined it with another project, a tow. She talked Dr. Axelman into making a model, a scale model of the tow. And before you know it, we had this grant that paid for everything. Just about everything. Before I go any further, though, we started planning for these last year sometime. I did a little bit of the research, and then Patricia took it. And she spent hundreds of hours planning these panels. Now, folks, this is not a scrapbook. Okay? You don't put it here and say, oh, no, I don't like it there. You move it here. Because once they're done, they're done. You don't move anything around. So she did this work with the design experts and spent hundreds of hours doing it. And finally, it was time for those panels to arrive. We were a little short of money, and it was going to cost $500–600 for those panels to be shipped here. So she said, okay, I'll ask Patty Baldwin if she'll go down to New York with me and we'll pick them up. I couldn't believe that. Well, it's no problem. We'll just go across the ferry, go on Long Island, and I'll visit here, there, and then we'll come home. Well, they left on a Tuesday, the day after Memorial Day. And they were due back Wednesday. Tuesday came, they were gone. Wednesday came, they hadn't returned. Thursday I got a phone call saying, well, we might be back later. I'm not sure what they were doing all that time. Excuse me, I didn't shut the phone up. But anyway, they went all the way to Long Island to pick up these panels and the hardware and brought them back. She's a wonderful lady. She does a lot for the History House. She does all of the gardening out here with the volunteers. And she spends hours writing grants for the History House. And she spent hundreds of hours for this grant, preparing and seeing it through. Patricia, thank you.
She spends half her life on her knees in the garden. I swear she's spends the other half on these writing grants.
And praying that we get them.
Well, I probably don't have to talk about a lot of things because you already did.
Sorry.
You already did. I have to admit that I saw a story on the internet about the Long Island Express. Now, Patty and I drove to Southern Connecticut, took the Long Island ferry from New London over to Orient Point. And then there we meandered through these wonderful little towns and then got to the Long Island Expressway and drove to Deer Park where we picked up the pianos. Well, today I saw an article on the internet that talked about 3 people driving BMWs who are going over 100 miles an hour on the expressway, dodging in and out, passing on the right, going between cars, just because they wanted to do it. And I thought to myself, thank God that they don't want to do that. Never have me go back. So, last year, well, to begin with, we had that wonderful new grant to the Lee Granville Gallery that dealt with the river. And after that, 2 years ago started, we got together and started thinking about what's the next step. And the next step for me was a bateau. I just thought it would be so neat to have a bateau that showed what it was that people got into to do some of this river logging work. And I approached everybody and asked them if they'd build a bateau, and Dave said yes. So he built the bateau. It was installed last year, but we still haven't had the panels made yet, so it was this year. The first one, of course, talks about Leonard McDonald and his failed trip during the Revolutionary War times to get to Quebec to capture. And it also talks about the river guard and the loggers who put their lives in danger doing that hard work. So that's the first panel. The second panel features, well, there's a wonderful quote from Lee Zantford Granville about the Abenaki folks, the native peoples who long before the European settlers or explorers or settlers ever came to this area. They were there. They were there in canoes going by. They were there at the falls fishing. They were on the island raising crops. So they are the first peoples that really were here. So we do talk about, and quote, have a wonderful quote on that second panel about that. Then of course we have featured people who created the earliest travel and industry development in our section of the river. The ice harvesting, the Moore's Ferry from Elm Street to Alder Street, the sawmill, and all the related industries to that. And then the third one features the earliest, 19th and early 20th century visionaries, those folks that understood how to harness the power of the Kennebec to create a vital, spirited, and industrial community here. What they created there is beyond our imagination when we look at Skowhegan as it is today. It was just filled with all sorts of industry, and Nels had a wonderful program early this spring that talked about some of that. That third panel tries to capture what it is that those folks did in the 1800s and 1900s. And then the last thing I wanted to say is these things, this sort of project never happens in isolation. It just takes so many pieces and so many people to put those pieces together to make it happen. I have to thank the Maine Community Foundation for granting us money to begin with. Mel, for all his research, I think he really downplayed his role. He spent enormous amounts of time researching all of the material that you see and more that you would see on those 3 panels. Tides Edge graphic design folks in Yarmouth, they did a terrific job helping us through the process of putting these things together. Fossil Industries, the people out on Long Island who produced the panels. And the interesting thing about that is that when we went to pick up the panels, we got to talking to the folks there, and they shared that, yes, okay, we uploaded, or the graphic designers uploaded the file to them. They downloaded it to Auburn, Maine, where they pressed the image. So it's literally its Maine pressed, Maine. But then it was shipped back to Long Island so that they could finish it off and finesse it so that it could look the way it does now. I have to thank Plum Creek and Sappy for donations. Mark Doty, Ben Doty's dad, who also provided some financial support. Of course, David Axelman, who donated his time, materials, and labor to build a wonderful bateau, and of course he still maintains it. Hammond Lumber for donating all of the bateau materials and a good portion of the overlook materials. Dennis Pellet for donating the pulpwood that the bateau sits on. Lee York and Buzz Lamb for donating the boom chains that surround, or at least surround on the two sides of the bateau. Paul and Eli Tucker for building the overlook and installing the panels. And last but not least, Patty Baldwin for going with me to New York. That was a trip. So, thank you for coming, and I do hope you'll go out and enjoy the panels, and if you have questions, here I am, and if I can't answer them, don't quote.
Patricia, there's one thing when you look at the bateau, you'll see stones leading ahead of the bow,
Yep.
and that shows how big it was.
Yes, typically these bateaus were anything from 12 feet to 85 feet or longer. So when you look at the bateau from the bow to where the granite stone marker is about 84 feet. So that gives you the idea of how big one of these bateaus were.
I think it was supposed to 34.
34? Oh, 34. They could be 84. They could be 84, 34 feet, I'm sorry. Okay, so questions?
Thank you very much, Patricia. I do hope that you all go out and have a good look at the bateau and the three panels and the overlook. We call it an overlook. It's not a deck. It's an overlook. We do have some refreshments in the parlor. And of course, look at the new exhibit in the Lee Granville Gallery. And the papers here on the table are back issues, most of them, of newsletters. Help yourself to any or all of them. And the issues that are right here by the roses on the end are this spring issue. So if you didn't get a spring issue of the River's Edge, help yourselves. Thank you very much for coming. Enjoy yourself, and be careful as you get out the stairs to go out to look at the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I took part. I know. They'll like it. Big.
Good. So this early morning sun, where it's clearest, is the time to go.
I used to try to do that some mornings. It's nice and crispy clear. On my way home from Bingham,
Yep.
I would go to top of Bigelow Hill.